Well, my name is Daniel Malik. I'm the Director of Content and Innovation at View Studios. We own and operate a few studios across North America, and we're partnering with Unilumin for Virtual Production Central. So if you have missed some of the talks today, we're going to be recording them, and they're all going to be available online. And we have plenty of other opportunities to connect for the rest of this show. So make sure you check out our schedule online. Before we get started in the conversation, I want to have all of our amazing panelists today for Lights, Camera VAD go ahead and introduce themselves. So why don't we go down the line, starting with you, Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Diener. I'm CEO of Synapse Virtual Production. We are a company that provides end-to-end virtual production service, including VAD work. I also am a producer working 15 years in the business with studios, advertising agencies, production companies to produce film, television, music videos, and commercials.
I'm AJ Wedding. I'm the co-founder and director of virtual production for Orbital Studios. We also sort of do end-to-end virtual production services for television and film.
Hi, I'm Connor Murphy. I'm the virtual production manager for the third floor. We mostly do pre-viz, tech-viz, that kind of stuff, but we work really closely with VADs, and we tend to be the people that they call when they don't know how to do something.
Hi guys, my name is Alvin Rentz, and I am the VP of Research and Development here at View. So I help a lot of trying to find a new technology in virtual production and help it to implement in our system and push the industry together. So.
My name is Patrick Palmer. I'm a principal solution architect with AWS. I focus on virtual art department and generative AI tools. Before that, I was at Jim Henson Creature Shop, where I worked in virtual production for 10 years as a principal engineer, working on hundreds of episodes using this technology.
Very cool. Thank you, guys. So to get started, we're going to talk about what the VAD is, Virtual Art Department. I know for myself, 2 years ago, I had never heard the term VAD. I didn't know what it was, and come to know now, it's literally a part of my everyday life. I hear it multiple times a day, and it's essential to virtual production. So this question is for you all. How would you define VAD, or Virtual Art Department?
I would define VAD, the virtual art department, as anything that's winding up within a virtual production volume on the screens. That could be in its entirety as a full environment, or the parts that it's built from, the assets, the elements, animations, and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, we had a great call before this where we all jumped on, and we just had this. I'm loving where this is going. So I think to add on to that, I would say that it's also this amazing document that all the key creatives can use throughout the process of pre-production as a living document to keep us organized.
Yeah, I think it used to be that VAD was more involved in the rest of virtual production. So, in the Avatar days, that was all of our mocap assets. So I think really it's when the production designer comes up with things, they're handing off to costumes, props, other groups like that. Anything digital now, I would call that.
I think the VAD, in terms of my perspective, this is where the virtual production starts with a lot of our people that getting into it. It informs them the actual environment and how to look at it in virtual production approach. It helps them understand to see what's the possibilities, and it explains to those people that are trying to get into the virtual production. So I think it's a way for people to really understand virtual production, because the previous aspect of it, and then knowing how to translate it from digital or physical assets to digital assets and how to mix them together, I think is what VAD for me. It's all started in that side.
Yeah, and to continue on with that, it's really the illusion where you meet the virtual meets the real world, right? And you're not going to have just a wall. You're going to bring all these practical props to sell that illusion. And so the virtual art department is really that execution arm of these virtual assets.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well. So, Connor, a question I have for you, and anyone else, feel free to chime in as well. But how is VAD different, and how is it changing traditional pipelines that we're seeing, in film and television?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the big jump that we had from back in motion builder days, which is where I came on through MoCap, is the fidelity. And so we're seeing that obviously we want photoreal on the wall almost every single time. And we live in limits, right? We can't do literally anything on the wall. And so as that ceiling increases, that is becoming more the final look, right? And as previs, we wind up filling a lot of those gaps. So we might have a lower fidelity character or a temp character that gets stuffed in there. And obviously you want everything to match as closely as you can, but realistically, you're gonna be making changes every day. So yeah, I mean, it's trying to figure out where the work can be saved because you can take VAD's work and use it for previs, and where a previs model might cut it for a lighting scout on the wall.
Anything to add? Anyone else on that?
Yeah, I would say that virtual art department and virtual production is really where post-production and visual effects now comes up earlier in the chain, right? They get a bigger voice. They get to participate in the process of generating these arts. They bring their expertise and the experience, but also bring it early on into the approval and decision making. And it really gives them the ability to then have an informed opinion and decision when they start the bidding process, right? So now visual effects can be more informed on their bidding. It could help them deliver on time and on budget.
I would add to it as well, saying that it is a department in and of itself, and because of that, the requirements to collaborate within a production team are all heightened. So if a traditional art department, if a cinematographer, if a director or producer is location scouting, they're spending a tremendous amount of time reviewing where they're going to be filming, where the light's coming from, what kind of wood it is, all the different things that will have an impact to what's on screen. And now if you're shooting in a virtual setting in a volume, this can account for 70, 80, 90% of what's going to be on screen. So it requires everybody to pay that much more attention to it, making sure that if you're shooting a beach scene, that the sand on the screen matches the sand that the art department's going to be bringing in, or if it's a football field, that it's the same type of grass. All these little nuances that are so important for the integration of the wall to the practical art department require that much more coordination within the team.
And so obviously that's a big shift from what many people are used to, putting so much more creative energy and time, resources, money into the pre-production side of the pipeline. So what are some of the ways, and I want to direct this to you, AJ and Justin, since you actively work with clients, what are some of the ways that you educate clients and collaborators on the role of VAD?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for them to understand what they're going to get out of this, right? It's like, yes, you're going to have your big expensive days on the LED wall, but more importantly, you're going to have this document, right? This working collaborative piece that every one of your creatives can look at and say, oh, basically, if we're all looking at the same dragon, then everybody's thinking along the same lines, right? I think that's the big thing for the collaborative nature of what virtual production can give us. And I think that the VAD becomes that world that we can share instead of everybody doing something separately, right? So you've got one guy doing storyboards, you got somebody else over here doing concept designs. In this world, you can have it all in one place and everyone can be looking at the same thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would say a huge part of the responsibility with the education of it, with the clients, and even more so the clients, the people that are also going to be working in it, all of us that are beginning to play with this technology more and more, is education and making sure that we're properly level setting and communicating what can and needs to be done. Timelines are tremendously important to understanding what the capabilities are, as well as the capabilities of the technology itself. We can do a lot with this. We can't do everything, and some of the stuff isn't going to be perfect. And I think being able to understand what somebody's looking for and saying, this is going to work, this is going to be a stretch, and you'd be better off just doing this the way that we've been doing it for the past 30 years, is important to all of our success within the industry, because nobody wants to oversell people on something that's ultimately going to have a poor product. And I think that that's our responsibility as professionals within the education of this.
Absolutely. I want to talk for a second, and Alvin, I'm going to ask you this. So Alvin didn't share this, but his background is as a cinematographer, DP, who stumbled into virtual production. So from the perspective of a cinematographer, how have you seen the role of VAD coming into play? How are you pushing the limits, and how do you see cinematographers today working with the virtual art department?
So I think from the traditional filmmaking, from the perspective of being a DP, the set design or the art department is a very close tied with the DP. It actually helps you, visualize or the harmony of the colors, or even make your lighting, works well together. So I think thinking of the VAD, a lot of people might think of it as an environment build, or creating environments in Unreal Engine and trying to match it in physical. To me, I think there is a technical aspect of it, the technical artist of it, that could actually prep the production in a better success by even giving them the ability to change texture, by prepping them to a better iterations of different textures of the rocks or different sizes, or even giving them a blueprint of light cards, or the ability to change the environment or the lighting scenarios of it. So I think the VAD, if it is successfully implemented in the beginning, could help the DP early on in the process, and then help the DP to be successful at the end. It's like, it reminds me of a lot of a good prop master that has all these tiny little tricks on set, that they all have this something to fix the issue or find some hacks into the actual set that you're doing, or paint or carpentry that they could always do on set. So I think that's a lot of the VAD that they could do if you utilize them early on, and make sure that they understand your vision.
When working with DPs and directors, we found that 3D decisions are sticky decisions. And so the more that you can involve those key creatives at the beginning, and they might like the frame that's in that still or that concept art, but literally the perspective could be wrong and it's not a possible shot, right? So as much as you like that painting, if you're looking at it in 3D, you can say, this is my real film back, this is my real lens, this is the size of the building that we're in. And those kinds of things are going to let them find something that's creatively satisfying. They're going to commit to that early on, and they're going to waver from it a lot less by the time they get to their day.
And I would say, to add to that, is that the DPs are part of the creative process from the beginning, working with the director and the art department. And so by bringing in them with the VAD, what you're doing is having them participate in the decisions in the 3D, because by the time you get to VFX, they're on their next show. And they don't get to have that voice. So they get to bring in that creative voice, another creative voice with the eye of the look, texture, and the vision into that process.
Very cool. Alvin, you mentioned art, and I think anyone can answer this next question, so feel free. But what does the relationship look like between the virtual art department and the physical art department, traditional production design? What are some of the things that are good? What are some of the things that may cause tension? And again, feel free, anyone, to chime in on this.
So I think it's important to know what everybody's boundaries are, right? For instance, I was on a show where I was the virtual production supervisor. But on another show, I do the same job, but I'm the virtual art director, because I'm not a supervisor level on that show. And so it's important to understand sort of the politics of it, I think. I think that production designers are really starting to love this because of how much they can see and how much they can be involved in something that would have been visual effects, like you say, long after they're on their next show. They're getting to actually have a say, and so is the DP for that matter. But everyone that I've worked with in production design, they're eating this stuff up. I mean, we're actually in the middle of setting up a art department class through Epic Games. I think it's in a couple of weeks over at Nant Studios, and I mean, the attendance for that right now is just incredible. All the entire union's coming, it seems like. So.
I think talking about the inclusion of the different roles and responsibilities, I forgot who touched on it, bringing the DP in early, bringing the production designer in early is incredibly important. I've had shows that have started where the virtual art department began before the traditional art department, and that can be very whiplash for the production designer to come in and understand that certain decisions are being made for what's an overlapping department that he hasn't been included or she hasn't been included in. Whereas if you're able to bring everybody in at the beginning and start to create this world together, you're naturally going to find where people fit in the hierarchy or the politics of all of it and have a much better success with that.
Very interesting. You know, you mentioned some of the roles that are emerging about within the VAD. Could you guys all talk about some of those roles? You mentioned sometimes you're the virtual or the ICVF supervisor, sometimes you're the virtual art director. You know, what are some of the emerging roles that you've seen recently, and how do they interact both in pre-production and on set? And Connor, I'll give you this one to kick us off.
Sure. So, again, coming from pre-biz, most often the pre-biz is starting about the same time as the VAD. And so there winds up being, you just really have to have communication between departments to avoid doing extra work and to get the sign-offs that you need when you need them. So just one project, for example, they were saying, okay, we know we're going to have a big battle scene, rolling hills, castle in the background. That made sense to kick off VAD on that. Start figuring it out. We had a pretty locked, here's what our castle is going to look like. But meanwhile, the bad guys layer, they really had no idea what they wanted. And so it made more sense to start with previs on that end. We iterated through that, figured out the blocking of the scene, wound up making the hallway way longer so that they had time to talk. You know what I mean? And now all of a sudden, that's going to go off and get split up, and maybe it becomes a practical build. Maybe a piece of it is done on the volume, or maybe they get to a balcony at the end, and that's where the volume piece is. And so really, until they know what that scene is going to play like, it doesn't make sense to hand off to the VAD.
And one of the things that is very much related to VAD is volume control teams, and this is called Brain Bar. At View, we like to call ours the Nest. So there's different terms across the industry, but how do you all see it in your various workflows, the VAD integrating with the volume control team?
So we've used what is called like the volume control operator, and they're the one who is a kind of the point person for either with the VAD supervisor or the VFX supervisor. And for us, when the people as they transition from the VAD onto on-set, one of the things for them to learn is really kind of this on-set etiquette, where they haven't been on set before, and there is a kind of dynamic. They have to be able to handle the high pressure of a set environment, as well as work with some challenging personalities. And so they have to understand who they listen to and respect, but then who actually gives them, who is their department lead for which they do changes with. And so that what we've kind of seen as the kind of biggest transition from the VAD to the onset is really that personnel questions.
Yeah, when we hire people that have film experience or set experience, and regardless of what they understand about Unreal or volume control or any of that, and they can be taught that. They can't be taught how to act in a high-pressure situation where 5 minutes means $60,000. So that's a big thing for us, I think.
And the volume control team is ultimately responsible for the success of the virtual art department. They are totally interrelated, where if a VAD team is designing a massive environment that has volumetric lighting and animations and simulations and all sorts of different complexities that increase the size or how heavy that asset is, once it gets handed over to the volume team, if they're not able to optimize it for proper playback on the volume, then everybody's going to find tremendous frustration because they're not going to get the asset that they've been working on for the past month, or they might be limited in the types of camera work that can get done on set. All of the different options. So if you don't have a close and functional working relationship between your VAD department and your Unreal or your volume team or your Brain Bar, whatever you want to call it, you're going to have an unsuccessful operating team.
We don't operate walls directly, but one thing I found is that almost always the problems that you guys find on set, it's kind of like I wish I knew this yesterday, right? Like I could have told you this was a likely problem yesterday. And so recently we had a big production where our supervisor was, of course, placing the LED wall in the big 3D environment, and then just created an automated way to do a top-down view of here's what the day is going to look like. Here's where all the actors are standing. These guys are all digital, so don't worry about them. Especially for stunts, they were able to go talk to the stunt team and say, where's your rig going to go? Where's this riser? There were children in the cast, so if the kids have any kind of a riser, we can just flag it with safety. Like the day that that shot gets designed, you now have this PDF that you can just get emailed out to department heads, and now department heads can start to wrap their mind around, whether it's props or volume control or any of that. They all have a chance to flag it long before it becomes issue.
Yeah, we like to tell this story, and I'll preface this with, at VIEW, we've worked with some of the best, VAD team members. Some come from a game design background and other backgrounds, even some who come from a VFX background and maybe haven't even been on set before. And it's kind of comical because if someone comes on set for the first time, and they're asked, hey, I need a stinger, or we got to move that C-stand, or whatever it is. It's like it's a foreign language that we speak on set. And so there's this story that it was an operator, and it was one of his first times on set. An AD was breathing down his neck, and he stepped away, and he was basically hyperventilating. And we're like, are you okay, buddy? Are you okay? And he's like, the AD just yelled at me. I'm a shot behind. We're 10 minutes behind or whatever. And we're like, dude, you're doing great. You're only 10 minutes behind. Like this is going really well for you, actually. So take a chill pill. That's the AD is talking to you, so you're doing your job. So
the AD's yelling at everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. If the AD didn't want to talk to you, then you'd be in trouble.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, I was going to say, because that's one thing that we actually learned in a VIEW at virtual production, that as the stage control or operating the wall for virtual production, the talent, there's two actual area for it, which is the actual 3D design of it and the actual operating side of it in the stage operation. And then I think traditionally a lot of the VFX industry is the one that pioneered the virtual production, but we're seeing, because of Unreal Engine, we're seeing a lot of game development and game designers that's coming into this new industry. And I think that's the stories that we hear on that is it's literally three industries that we're trying to combine together: is the film, the show, and then the game design of it. But we learned from our side, as we separate the VAD and also the stage control, is the stage control is more of like the filmmaker mindset. At the end of the day, the stage is a film set, so you need to understand, you need to be aware of the rules and the language on set. You need to be able to understand that. And then for the VAD, it needs to be able to, or the game design needs to be able to have an idea on how they could help the actual production itself by providing them tools or informing them ahead of time and making sure that they're in sync together. So
very cool. So the last thing I want to talk about is how the VAD relates to VFX, and there's a lot of cross-pollination happening. So this is an open question. Feel free anyone to chime in. But how do you work in your pipelines with traditional visual effects, and what is that dynamic like?
I'd like to mention Perforce. So we typically are the first ones on, being previs, and usually whatever VFX vendor comes in to save the day at the end of the production is the last one on. And so we've had a couple of issues before where it's not clear who owns the Perforce server, who's paying for it, who's maintaining it. So now, as much as possible, we try to get the production to do it, because really they're the ones who own the data. The last thing we want is for the Perforce server to just suddenly get turned off. Ask me about that. And so what we found is that, of course, every company has some amount of proprietary stuff that they don't necessarily want to share with competitors, but that we all need to be able to share data. And so we just try and come up with a little document. We just have like a, here's what's worked for us in the past. What do you think? And then 9 times out of 10, they're fine with it. And it basically is, here's the area where the director reviews from. We have strict naming conventions here. And here's your play zone, or all the web stuff, or whatever it can be. And sometimes we'll even have one below that where we, want to bring things in from other shows, clean them up a little, and then push it to our TTF zone. And then once that scene's done, that sequence gets approved, then it goes to the showrunner's area, and that's where he can do his VR or what have you. So just per force management, thinking about that ahead of time is a big one for us.
One of the beautiful things about virtual production is that you're not shot counting, right? Like in traditional production, green screen, blue screen, often bids are generated by how many shots you're going to have. Because every shot requires its own tracking and roto and compositing, acid, whatever it is, and there's a price tag with it. Virtual production, you're there for the day, you can hose it down all day, put as many shots in your edit, and you're good to go. But a challenge becomes, well, there could still be other VFX shots, and maybe we are shooting in a castle that is getting designed before visual effects is really starting. Now, if visual effects all of a sudden needs to acquire some creative that they need to execute, if they become pregnant with something that they had no say in whatsoever, that there's a lot of problems that can come with it, because it might increase their manpower, it might increase their schedule, it could increase all these different things. So it just goes back to the earlier point of the importance of different departments working together, and visual effects is no different. They need to have a say in it the same way the art department does, or costumes does, or camera does, because if everybody's making assumptions for other departments and only looking out for what they think the director or producer or studio may want, it's going to cause issues later down the road as other people get involved. So I would say keeping visual effects in the loop is tremendously important to the success of a successful virtual art department.
And I would add that the VAD really came up during COVID, and is full of. You talk to everyone; they're all full of remote workers and remote artists, and so the visual effects had a harder time doing that transition. And so when I talk to visual effects artists and VAD artists, I say one of the things to focus on is really those soft skills, right? For that interaction, how do you create this remote atmosphere that you can be collaborative, right? And that's the biggest thing, is how do you communicate? How do you disagree but then commit to moving forward without it becoming personal, right? And it's really those soft skills that these people need to develop, in that kind of not worried about what you look like on get that. And then because the cloud is just going to grow and grow and have, as we kind of expand the use of the cloud in this diverse workforce throughout the world, we just have to kind of be cognizant of that workflow and that, everyone collaborating together.
Very good. Well, with that, I want to open it up to see if there's any questions in the audience for our amazing panelists here related to VAD or where you're getting dinner tonight. So, yeah.
We answered the mic.
Yeah.
First off, that was awesome. It was great to hear the perspective of the team that sometimes you don't see in the studio, but if they've done their job, it makes everything in the studio so much easier. I'm really curious, on stage we've been able to find these kind of workflow hacks for okay, the driving plates we're going to do on video, this shot we're going to do in 2.5D. What is a hack that you're seeing on the VAD side where okay, I go back to this trick every time because it accelerates the workflow? Is there stuff that you guys have in your toolbox that you go, all right, when I'm in a crunch, this is a workflow hack that really helps the VAD?
I don't work on the box, so I don't, but I would say Unreal is the hack. I mean, game changer for coming from a studio that was specialized or part of our offering was visual effects. To go from that workflow where you're working in Maya and Nuke and Flame and all the other different softwares to having these bundled up with a software that's as robust and as fast as it is, the things that I've seen achieved in 1/4 of the time by a fraction of the artists really cannot be understated.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. What's up, Tim? That's sort of the biggest, I think, growth thing that we have right now, because we still have visual effects houses that are still having to use their own pipelines, right? And so a lot of the artists are still making things in Maya and then having to convert them over into Unreal, and that process takes more time. But anytime you can take something from Unreal from the beginning all the way through the end, it's going to be 20 times faster, probably.
So I would say looking at whatever you're going to do on the wall through a camera early. We wound up on one show and we had what I thought was a terrible previs asset. And we put it on the wall and like there were parts that were usable. You know what I mean? Like it was not intended to be full VAD. And you really looked at it and you realized that what was in frame most of all was is the side of the building. The big shiny glass piece right where it met the concrete looked super fake, right in that little gap. And so a note could go to the art director or VAD or whoever was designing that stuff and say, let's really grind that up. Let's really like make sure, because that scene is what's going to be in the shot.
I think for me as a DP, the hack that they could give me from the VAD is the ability to give me more options on set, to be able to be more flexible and allow me to give more decisions on set. Like you said, like a happy accident, it always comes down to what you see on camera. There's a lot of moment in virtual production that happy accident happens. Like they move the camera, it's like, okay, stop there. I like that. Let's shoot that. But then if I have more tools that I could maybe allow me to shift it a little bit here or modify something in engine, I think that's always a big help.
I think the biggest hack is like ray traced lighting. If it wasn't for ray traced lighting, everything would be so much harder, right? The artists don't have to focus on that. You're like, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. That to me is the biggest win so far that we've seen really to make this work.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hey guys, I want to ask about virtual backlot, and I've heard a lot of really mixed kind of response about how usable assets are, more specifically, how reusable assets are. And I'm kind of curious, in your own practical experience, how useful has the virtual backlots been for you guys?
Tremendously useful. Even if you're not, well, I don't think that you should just take an existing asset and use it one-to-one in a professional setting. If you're going to be providing that asset to a client that's paying for it, I think what we try to do is plus it up, right? Is try to curate something new and special and unique. But to be able to start with an existing asset, even if you're just level setting with what it is that they're looking for scope, size, lighting, reference, building on it, changing textures, optimizing it in different ways, it's an incredibly valuable tool.
Agreed.
I think you can add to the virtual backlot that it's not a physical backlot the way you had costumes and like spears for your Roman movie, right? I think it's important to think of the virtual backlot as like, here's water, here's a different water, right? And like here's like a whole catalog of grass and of snow and of trees and whatever, because that's what you're going to wind up building a new world with, rather than reinventing a watershed road.
Kid bashing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And the more VAD that we build, the more assets we have to pull from, the faster it gets. I mean, we have like, I think 90 stock environments at Orbital that we can always, was that in a desert? Oh, great. You pull a desert, at a spaceship, you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, earlier the decisions are made, the better everything is for the production. And that's what really you're seeing is, even if you're not using the asset, you're seeing the decisions made.
Any other questions?
Check, check. Okay. Hello, thank you. What I'm thinking about when we're talking about all this is like how we're looking at an image together that's there, and there's so many different departments working on it. Have you noticed as we transition into this virtual world where we're all in a studio looking at the same image and we all have our thoughts about it, is there conflicts that are happening in context of relationship of different departments and then a director who I guess becomes a facilitator of what is the best choice when we're thinking about lighting on things and how we want to shift that toning, how that mixes between cinematography and the art department, which I guess becomes mise en scène. Are you noticing any conflicts and what's helpful, like in the realms of like camera to art department? What would you say? Or your thoughts on that?
I'd say the bigger the show is, the more helpful it is to have a really strict hierarchy, and that at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the director. If it's a stunt shoot, maybe the director says, I am going to be stunt coordinator at the head of everything, right? And so, when we're trying to get our approvals, we're feeding them up, and to some extent, the director might change something we decided 2 months ago. That's the name of the game.
And yeah, there's a ton of conflicts. And like that's what film production is. It's conflicts every day. What this technology, what virtual art department is able to do versus other types of production is provide examples in real time or pretty close to it. So an example of what I'm talking about is, let's say that a director has an idea that he or she wants to shoot a scene in an exterior, right? Okay, it should be the woods in the day. Oh, well, the DP says, don't you think it would look better if we shot this at night? It can get the emotion across. Production designers sitting there saying, well, there's not this type of tree there, so that's going to be a problem. We're never going to find this place. If you step into a volume with your crew, you can say, let's look at the first forest. Okay, can we see what it looks like with the sunset? Dusk, night. What if it's aspen trees? What if it's ferns? Okay, you know what? I had a crazy idea. What if it's a desert instead? You would never be able to do that in traditional production. You try doing that location scouting, you're spending a week driving around in a van together.
We do that all the time in previs. That's where we should do that.
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you for the amazing questions. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists for joining us. And before we end, I do want to give a shameless plug. Tomorrow, Connor's going to be doing a demo of the Third Floor's product called Cyclops. It's an amazing pre-visualization tool at 5:15 right here at Virtual Production Central. So hope to see you back for that. Thank you, everyone.